Okay, all right. Now what we'll do is we were going to build server.py, right? Server.py is where we'll be writing our fast API code, and telemetry is where we'll be writing the telemetry code execution, which basically helps us connect to Azure. This is called as Azure Open Telemetry Integration. Okay. This is basically tracking and all of that. So if you can recall, we had also defined for Azure Application Insights, right? Uh, this will help us work with that. Okay, so what we'll do is firstly we'll write the telemetry code, and then we'll write the fast API code, and then we'll execute both of them. All right, so let us first go towards go towards this thing, uh, building the telemetry code. Okay, now okay, let's actually get started. So first and foremost, I'm going to import OS, then I'm going to import logging, and then what I'm going to do is from azure.monitor dot open telemetry, I'm going to import something called as configure Azure monitor. Okay. Now, see, the thing is, we already have, now some of you might say, Chirantan, we already have LangGraph, Langsmith in place. Do we really need this? You can keep this as one more option along with Langsmith, okay? Because this is a bit different also from Langsmith, okay? It basically tracks your app performance, errors, requests, and a lot more things, okay? So yes, so you can also, so this is also important, especially if you're depending on Azure infrastructure. Okay. All right. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create, I would say we are going to create a dedicated logger. Yeah. So we'll say logger equals to logging dot get logger, and we'll be creating a logger called as brand guardian telemetry. Okay. This is what we're going to define. After this, what we'll be defining is the function which helps us set the telemetry. So we're going to call it setup telemetry. All right. And what this function will do is basically, first and foremost, it initializes the Azure Open Telemetry. Okay. So I will say initializes Azure monitor open telemetry. This is what it initializes. Okay. And first and foremost, what is open telemetry? Open telemetry is, you can think of this as an industry standard observability framework. We preferred Langsmith, right? Langsmith is also an observability framework. Open telemetry is also used. Okay. And when it comes to open telemetry, what will it exactly track? So it will track your HTTP requests, it will track your database queries, it will track your errors, it will track your performance metrics, so on and so forth. There are a lot many things that are tracked using this. Okay. And this function will send the data to Azure monitor. Okay. You can actually think of this like flight data recorder, right? Okay, for your app. And yeah, so this is fine. And once we have set up the telemetry part, okay, it auto captures every API request. Okay, I would say it auto captures every API request. So we'll be using fast API, right? So it will capture that request. Okay, and no need to manually log each endpoint. We don't have to log manually each endpoint. It gets tracked automatically. Okay, so first and foremost, what we're going to do is we are going to retrieve the connection string. Okay, so we're going to say connection string, okay, equals to os.getEnv, and inside inside .getEnv, .env, if you can recall, we had defined application insights connection string, right? And that is where we're going to fetch the API key from, and we're going to store that in connection string. All right. All right, now we're going to check if it is configured or not. All right, so what we'll do is if not connection string, which means if we did not get the connection string, then we want a logger warning. Okay, and we'll say that no instrumentation key found. Okay, we'll say that the telemetry is disabled. Okay. All right, so this is fine, and then we'll just return, which means we'll exit the function. All right. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to configure the Azure monitor. All right, and we'll first try. Okay, I mean we'll write the try block, wherein what we'll do is we'll see. We're going to create something called as configure Azure monitor, right? And inside that, we're going to pass a couple of things. Okay, and this configure Azure monitor will do the heavy lifting. Okay, so I'll create something called as configure Azure monitor, and inside this, first and foremost, I'll pass the connection string, yeah, which is the API key, or not the API key, the connection string that we have passed in .env, and then the logger name, right? Let's give the logger name here as brand guardian tracing. All right, or tracer, whatever. This is optional though. If you want to give, you can. If you don't want, it's fine. So Azure configure Azure monitor basically does the entire heavy lifting. It registers the automatic instrumentation for HTTP requests, which are your fast API endpoints, database calls, and in this database calls are nothing but Azure search calls or queries, the logging events, all of that. And this starts the background thread to send the data to Azure. Okay. And now once this is done, we're just going to put logger.info. Okay. And we'll say Azure monitor tracking enabled and connected. Okay. Looks fine. If this does not work, then we'll put an exception, except exception as E, and then we're just going to put a logger error, and we're going to say failed to initialize Azure monitor. Okay, and we'll pass the error. Yeah, so this is a simple function that we have built which will help us track the API and or whatever calls you're making via API, all of that. Okay. Yeah, so this is much better, much cooler. Okay. All right. So so why do we use telemetry? Okay, so see, first and foremost, we have to understand. Okay, why do we use or why do we use telemetry? Okay, so let's say if firstly I'll talk from without function. So if I don't have a telemetry, okay, let's say if we say the API is slow, okay, I mean randomly it will just our terminal or our log will just say API is slow, but we don't have any idea which part. So which part of API is slow? That is what will help us. That is what we'll understand, with telemetry. Okay, let's say how many users accessed our service today. Okay, we don't know, so there is no visibility. Again, this is something that can be solved with telemetry. So what happens with telemetry? Okay, so with telemetry we can have a dashboard. Let's say if I have an endpoint called as audit. Okay, so let's say audit endpoint say averages 4.5 seconds and indexer takes 3.8 seconds. Now what I'm trying to show you is such kind of information you will be able to track with telemetry, right? Which means even at endpoint level you understand what is the time taken by endpoint, all of that. Okay, then something like, or the statements like error logs show that 12% of audits fail due to YouTube download errors. Again, this is something that can be tracked. Okay, this is something that can your telemetry show. Okay, And also, for example, it can also show the metrics, right? For example, 450 API calls happened today, and out of those, let's say 450 calls, there was, let's say, 89% success rate. So you can see this is the difference with and without telemetry. Okay, and because because you're writing a production level code, if you actually show all of these skills, that will be much better. Yeah, so that is telemetry. Now let's go to the server part, which is where we write the FASTAPI code. All right, so moving to the next part. So what we're going to do is, first and foremost, we're going to import UUID, right? What happened? UUID, which is what? Which is, it is going to generate the unique session IDs, right? Then we are going to import logging. Then from FASTAPI, we're going to import FASTAPI, and we're also going to import HTTP exception. Okay, HTTP exception. All right, and then from Pedantic, we are going to import base model. Okay, after this, from typing, I'm going to import list, and I'm going to import optional. Okay, so my Pedantic data validation, it's a data validation library, right, which makes sure that the API requests have a correct format. Okay, all right, so now what we'll do is we'll load the environment variables. That is what we will do. All right, so we'll say from .env. Okay, import load .env, and then I'll say load .env override equals to true. Okay, after this, what I will do is, I will initialize the telemetry. We have written telemetry, right? So we'll initialize the telemetry part here. So I'll say from backend.src.api.telemetry, we're going to import what? Setup telemetry. If you can recall, we had a function called a setup telemetry. That is what we're going to call, and we're going to initialize it. It's like activating the sensors. This is going to track all your API activity, right? Now what we're going to do is we're going to import the workflow graph, right, which is our LangGraph. Okay, so what we'll do is from backend.src.graph.workflow, we're going to import what? We're going to import app as compliance graph. Okay, we're going to import it as compliance graph. Okay, so yeah. So, Acha, one more thing. Why have we renamed app, or why have we aliased app as compliance graph? This is just to avoid the confusion with the Fast APIs app. Okay, that is the reason we have did this. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll configure logging. So I'll just say logging dot logging dot basic config, and I'll pass level equals to logging dot info. Okay, which is basically it sets the default log level, and info basically means important events, right? And yeah, and then I'll just create one more logger object. I'll say logging dot get logger, and I'll pass this as API server. So we have created a name, right? So it creates a name logger for this module, and yeah. All right, now what we'll do is we'll now create the Fast API application. So create the Fast API application. All right. Now what we'll do is we'll say app equals to Fast API, and in Fast API, what we'll do is firstly we'll pass the title. Okay, title is, let's say I'm going to call it as brand guardian, or we can also call it anything. Like, let's say I'm going to call it's up to you. Let's say I'm going to call it brand guardian AI API. Yeah. Then I'm going to give a description. This is completely optional, but yeah, you can give that. So let's say API for auditing video content against the brand compliance rules. Okay, all right, and after this we're going to pass the version, which is, let's say, 1.0.0. Okay, this is done, and now my fast API will automatically create the interactive docs, right? And also create the OpenAI schema, right? So all right, and then what we'll do is we'll define the data models, yeah, which are nothing but the pedantic models. Okay, so I'll create a class called as audit request. Okay, and this takes in the base model, okay, which is a pedantic class. Okay, and what this actually does is basically I'll just give me a minute. Yeah, it basically defines the expected structure of incoming API requests. Okay, so it defines the expected structure of incoming API requests. That is what it does. All right. And so for example, so example valid request, okay, which is how do we want the valid example valid request to be something in the lines of, let's say if I give it this way, okay, just a minute, something like, let's say a video URL, okay, and how do you want that URL to be, something like HTTPS, okay, if this is the valid URL, by the way, let's say YouTube, let's say ABC123, something like this. Okay, so this is something that is a valid YouTube URL. Okay, and invalid, obviously we know, if it is invalid, then it is going to raise, so if it is an invalid URL, it is going to raise the 422 error, right? You can think of invalid as same, I mean, I'll just copy paste it here. Invalid can be 1 2 3 4 5, this can be invalid, right? So we're going to create this, and what we're going to expect here is am I doing something wrong? Just allow me a minute. I hope. Okay, all right, this is fine. No, I think this is fine. And then I'll pass the video URL, right? And I'm expecting the video URL to be a string for obvious reasons. Then what do we do is we'll create a class called as compliance issue, okay, which is again pedantic. Okay, and obviously it takes in three things. By now we know which are those three things. It takes category, right? It is severity, which is again string, and it is description. If you can recall, we had also defined this in the in the first parts of the session, right? And then we have a class called as audit response, okay, which is again pedantic. Okay, and what does it expect? It has session ID, which is string, then the video ID, which is again a string, then the status, which is again a string, then a final report to be generated, again a string, and compliance results. Now compliance results are optional, okay, but so we'll keep list, I'll say list compliance issue. Okay, so we want a list of compliance issues, not optional. We'll keep it as a list. Obviously we cannot keep it optional. Yeah, now what we'll do is now I think we can define the endpoint. Okay, so yeah, so I think now we will define the main endpoint. Okay, so let's say we're going to call it as audit. Okay, and we'll say response model equals to audit response. Okay, so this is the decorator. I mean, I hope you can understand, right? This is the decorator that registers this function as the post endpoint. Yeah, and slash audit is nothing but it's the URL path. So in our case, it will be localhost :8000 slash audit. Yeah, and the response model basically tells FastAPI to validate the response that matches with the audit response, which is this one. Okay. All right, and after this what we shall do is we will be creating a function, and what I'll do is I'll keep that function as async, which is typically used in concurrency, right? So I'll call a function, create a function called as audit video, which takes in a request, which is the audit request. Okay, and typically this is the main API endpoint that triggers the compliance audit workflow. Okay, so I'll write it here. This is the uh, main API endpoint that triggers the compliance audit workflow, right? Um, so what we'll do is we'll ask it to generate a few things. Okay, one is the session ID, right? Which is what? Which is uuid dot uuid4 will take. Yeah. Then the video ID short, right? If you can recall, we had also defined this in our earlier codes, which is what? Which is video underscore session ID, and we want the first 8 characters in the session ID, right? This is video ID, and then we also want to log the incoming request, right? So we'll just say logger.info, and in here I'll say that we have received the audit request. Okay, and what is that? We're just going to say request request dot video URL. Okay, and this is fine. What we can also define in here is, yeah, the session, right? So I'll just say session, the session ID, right? So all right, so for example, what will this do? It will say receive the audit response, then it will show the YouTube URL, okay, and then it will also show the session ID. That is what it means. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, now what we'll do is we'll prepare the graph input, and the graph input we already know, right? So what are the graph inputs? They are, if you can recall, we had defined something called as initial inputs, right? So I'll put in the video URL. Yeah. We'll take this from request.video URL, right? This is from the API request, right? So this is from the API request. Then is the video ID, right? Which is the video ID short that you defined, which is the generated ID. Then obviously you have the compliance results. Okay. Which is again an empty string for starters, and then the errors, which is again the empty string. Yeah. All right. So this tracks the error. This will be populated by the compliance auditor. And now what we're going to do is we are now going to invoke the LangGraph. Okay. So I'll just say final state equals to compliance graph dot invoke. And where do you invoke it on? You basically invoke this on the initial inputs, right? And then what you return? You return the audit response object. Okay, and you output the session ID. Okay, and then after the session ID, will be also giving so the video ID, right, which is the from the final state we are going to get the video ID, right? So yeah, I think this should be it. Yeah, so yeah, I think this is fine. Where it is going wrong is video ID. Yeah, the session ID equals to session ID. Okay, this is video ID, and then what it will do is it will also take uh, the status. So in audio response, it will take the session ID. Just give me a minute. I think something is off. Video ID it will take, which is final state dot get. Yeah. After this, After this, what we want is we want the status, right? So we want the status, and status is nothing but again final state dot get. Again we'll get the um, final status. Okay, if we don't get any final status, then obviously we're going to get unknown. Okay, then we are going to get the final report, and final report we are again going to get it from final state. So final state dot get, we're going to get the final report. Okay, if not, if we don't get any report, then no report generated. Okay, and then finally we also need the compliance results, right? So I'll say compliance results equals to final state dot get, and I'm going to get the compliance results. Yeah, if nothing, then I mean an empty or empty list, right? So this is compliance results. Okay, and after this what we can also pass is, yeah, I think this is fine. Yeah, and then finally the accept exception, yeah, as E. Okay, and we just log the error. Yeah, looks fine, and we'll just say that the audit request or the audit has failed. Okay, yeah, and we'll just see, we'll just catch the error as well. So what is the error exactly? And then we will basically raise an HTTP exception. Okay, so I'll just raise the HTTP exception, and in here it will be the status code 500, right, which is the internal server error. And we'll say, we'll put this detail as workflow execution failed. Okay, and then we'll also pass in what exactly the error is. Okay, after this what we'll do is we will be basically defining the health check endpoint, right? So the standard endpoint that we always define, right? Health check endpoint. Okay, I'll just say app dot get health. Okay, and then I'll just create a simple function called as health check. Okay, this is a simple endpoint just to check if the API is, or the endpoint is sorry, this is a simple endpoint to verify if the API is working or not. Okay, I would say endpoint to verify if API is working or not. Okay, all right, and in here what we can do is, should we pass anything more, or should I just, I think we don't need to pass anything here. We'll just keep it simple as it is. Yeah, so we'll just say return status. Okay, and it will return the status healthy. Okay, service. Okay, we'll say brand guardian AI. Okay, this looks great. So finally we have also built the API code here. Okay, this looks better, this looks fantastic. Now I don't think so we'll need any more things. Yeah, all right guys, so in the next video let's try to hit the fast API backend. Let's integrate the fast API backend and let's check. Yeah, all right, let's proceed.